The blistering sun beat down mercilessly on Beatrice Collins as she dragged herself across the vast Nebraska plains, her swollen belly containing not one, but two precious lives that she had sworn to protect with her dying breath. It was the summer of 1872, and the 22-year-old widow had been traveling for nearly 3 weeks since the wagon train she joined had left her behind after her husband's sudden death from fever. With dwindling supplies and strength fading by the hour, Beatrice could feel hope slipping away like the last drops from her nearly empty canteen. The golden prairie grasses swayed in the hot afternoon breeze, stretching endlessly in all directions. Beatrice's cracked lips parted as she whispered a prayer to whoever might be listening. Her cotton dress, once a cheerful blue, was now dust-covered and hanging loosely everywhere except her pregnant belly. Each step became more laborious than the last, and the twins she carried seemed to sense their mother's desperation, kicking and shifting as if urging her onward. Just a little further, she murmured to her unborn children, though she had no destination in sight. The small bundle of possessions she'd managed to carry had grown lighter as she'd been forced to abandon items along the way. All that remained were a few personal effects, a locket containing a sketch of her late husband, and barely enough food for another day. As the afternoon heat intensified, Beatrice's vision began to blur. The horizon seemed to waver, and she wasn't certain if the dark spot in the distance was real or a figment of her heat-addled imagination. She blinked hard, focusing on the shape that gradually grew larger. A rider. Hope fluttered in her chest like a trapped bird. She tried to call out, but her parched throat produced only a raspy whisper. Summoning her last reserves of strength, Beatrice raised her arm and waved it weakly above her head. The figure changed direction, heading straight toward her. As it drew closer, she could make out a man atop a chestnut mare, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the azure sky. The wide brim of his hat shaded his face, but she could see he wore the practical attire of a working cowboy, not the fancy duds of a city slicker nor the rough appearance of an outlaw. Just as her legs finally gave way beneath her, the rider reached her side. In one fluid motion, he dismounted and caught her before she hit the ground. "Easy now, madam," came his deep, concerned voice. "I've got you." Beatrice looked up into the face of a man perhaps 5 years her senior. His eyes, an unusual shade of gray-blue like the sky before a storm, were creased at the corners from years squinting in the sun. A neatly trimmed beard covered his jawline, and beneath his dusty hat, she caught a glimpse of sandy brown hair. "Water," she managed to croak. Without hesitation, he reached for his canteen, gently supporting her head as she drank. "Slow now," he cautioned. "Too much at once will make you sick." The water was like heaven sliding down her throat. As her senses returned, Beatrice became acutely aware of her situation alone on the plains with a stranger. But something in his gentle handling and the genuine concern in his eyes quieted her fears. "Thank you," she whispered when she'd had enough. "I thought I was going to die out here." "What in heaven's name are you doing out here alone?" he asked, his gaze dropping to her swollen belly. "And in your condition?" "The wagon train left me behind after my husband died. Said I'd slow them down." Tears welled in her eyes as she spoke the words aloud for the first time. "I've been walking for days." His jaw tightened, and a flash of anger crossed his features. What kind of people would do such a thing? Before she could answer, one of the twins delivered a particularly strong kick, causing her to wince and place a hand protectively over her belly. "You're carrying twins?" he asked, his expression softening. Beatrice nodded. "The doctor in St. Louis confirmed it before we left." The man looked around at the empty landscape before returning his gaze to her. "My name's Wade. Wade Montgomery. I've got a small ranch about half a day's ride from here. I can take you there, get you fed and rested." "I couldn't impose." "It's not an imposition, madam. It's basic human decency, something those wagon train folks seem to have forgotten." He paused, studying her face. "What's your name?" "Beatrice Collins. My husband was Thomas." Wade nodded respectfully. "Mrs. Collins, I can in good conscience leave you out here." That would be a death sentence for you and your little ones. He gestured to his horse. Penny here is strong. She can carry us both to my place. Beatrice hesitated only a moment before nodding. What choice did she have? Thank you, Mr. Montgomery. Wade, please, he insisted as he gathered her meager belongings. With gentle efficiency, he helped her onto his horse before mounting behind her. His arms came around her to take the reins, creating a secure cradle that made Beatrice feel safer than she had in weeks. Lean back if you need to, he said as they set off. It's a few hours' ride. As they traveled, Beatrice found herself gradually relaxing against Wade's solid chest. The steady rhythm of the horse's gait and the security of Wade's presence lulled her into a drowsy state. She fought to keep her eyes open, afraid that if she fell asleep, she might wake to find this had all been a desperate dream. Rest, Wade said softly, seeming to sense her struggle. I won't let you fall. Those simple words broke something inside her. After weeks of being strong, of fighting for survival, of being completely alone in her struggle, someone was finally offering help without condition. The tears came then, silent but steady, as she allowed herself to close her eyes. When Beatrice awoke, the landscape had changed. They were approaching a modest but well-maintained homestead nestled against a backdrop of rolling hills. A small creek ran nearby, and several cattle grazed in a fenced pasture. The main house was constructed of sturdy logs with a stone chimney, and a large barn stood to one side. It wasn't grand, but to Beatrice's weary eyes, it looked like paradise. This is it, Wade said as they approached. It's not much, but it's home. It's beautiful, she replied honestly. As they drew closer, a border collie came bounding out to greet them, followed by an older man who emerged from the barn. That's Hank, Wade explained. He helps me run the place. Best hand I've ever had. Hank approached as Wade carefully helped Beatrice dismount. The older man's eyes widened at the sight of her condition, but he quickly recovered. Miss, he greeted with a respectful nod. Hank, this is Mrs. Collins, Wade said. She's going to be staying with us for a while. She's had a rough go of it. If Hank had questions about the sudden appearance of a pregnant woman on their ranch, he kept them to himself. I'll see to your horse, he said simply. Wade led Beatrice into the house, which was surprisingly neat and organized for a bachelor's residence. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a solid wooden table, several chairs, and a comfortable-looking sofa near the fireplace. 2 doors led off to what she presumed were bedrooms. You can take my room, Wade said, leading her to the larger of the 2. I'll bunk with Hank in the extra room off the barn. I can't put you out of your home, Beatrice protested. You're not putting me out of anything, I offered. His tone brooked no argument. Now, you should rest properly while I rustle up some food. You look like you haven't had a decent meal in weeks. Beatrice couldn't deny that. Thank you, she said, the words feeling woefully inadequate for the kindness he was showing. Left alone in Wade's room, Beatrice took in her surroundings. The bed was neatly made with clean, if worn, linens. A chest of drawers stood against one wall, and a small shelf held a few books more than she would have expected for a cowboy. A basin and pitcher sat on a washstand, and when she checked, the pitcher was full of clean water. The simple luxury of washing her face and hands nearly brought tears to her eyes again. She used the comb she found to tame her tangled brown hair as best she could, then sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly overwhelmed by the day's events. A soft knock at the door roused her from her thoughts. Mrs. Collins? I've got some stew ready if you're feeling up to eating, Wade called. Beatrice opened the door to find him standing there with a steaming bowl and a chunk of bread. The smell made her stomach growl audibly, and a hint of a smile touched Wade's lips. I take that as a yes, he said, handing her the food. It's nothing fancy, but it's filling. It smells wonderful, she replied, accepting the bowl gratefully. And please call me Beatrice. He nodded. Beatrice, then. Eat up and get some rest. We can talk more tomorrow. The stew was simple but delicious chunks of beef, potatoes, and carrots in a rich broth. Beatrice had to force herself to eat slowly, knowing her stomach had shrunk from weeks of near starvation. The bread was clearly homemade, and she savored every bite. When she finished, she placed the empty bowl on the washstand and lay down on the bed, intending only to rest for a moment. But exhaustion claimed her immediately, and she fell into the deepest sleep she'd had since her husband's death. Beatrice woke to sunlight streaming through the small window. For a moment, she was disoriented, then the events of the previous day came rushing back. She placed a hand on her belly, feeling the twins move within her, and offered a silent prayer of thanks that they had survived the ordeal. The smell of coffee and something cooking drew her from the bedroom. She found Wade at the stove, frying bacon in a cast-iron skillet. He turned at the sound of her footsteps, and for the first time, she saw him clearly in the morning light. He was handsome in a rugged, weathered way, with those remarkable eyes that seemed to shift between blue and gray depending on how the light hit them. "Morning," he greeted. "How are you feeling?" "Better than I have in weeks," she admitted. "Thank you for the bed. I slept like the dead." "You needed it." He gestured to the table where a cup waited. "Coffee? It might be a bit strong." Beatrice hesitated. "Is there milk?" "Coffee's not good for the babies without it." Wade nodded. "Fresh this morning." He reached for a small pitcher and added a generous pour to her cup. As they ate breakfast bacon, eggs, and more of that wonderful bread, Wade finally asked the question she'd been dreading. "What are your plans, Beatrice? Where were you heading before things went wrong?" She set down her fork, appetite suddenly diminished. "Oregon. Thomas had a brother there, who offered us land to start fresh. But now—" She trailed off, the future suddenly looming as vast and intimidating as the plains she'd been crossing. Wade was quiet for a moment. "You could still go. Once the babies are born and you're strong enough, I mean. I could help you get to the next wagon train in spring." The thought of continuing the journey alone with twin infants made Beatrice's stomach clench with fear. But what choice did she have? "I don't know what else to do," she admitted. "I have no family back east to return to. Thomas was all I had." Wade seemed to be weighing his words carefully. "There's another option, though it might seem forward." He met her gaze directly. "You could stay here." Beatrice's eyes widened. "Stay? But I couldn't impose indefinitely." "It wouldn't be an imposition," he interrupted. "This place is too big for just me and Hank. And truth be told, I could use a woman's touch around here." He ran a hand through his hair, looking suddenly uncomfortable. "What I'm trying to say, and making a mess of it, is that I'm offering you my name, Beatrice." She stared at him, certain she'd misunderstood. "Your name?" "Marriage," he clarified. "It would be a practical arrangement. You need a home and security for your children." "I need—" He paused. "Well, I've been alone too long. And I've always wanted a family." Beatrice was speechless. This man she'd met just yesterday was proposing marriage? "I know it's sudden," Wade continued, clearly interpreting her silence as rejection. "And I understand if you refuse. But the offer stands. Think about it." "You would raise another man's children as your own?" she asked, finding her voice at last. "Those babies are innocent in all this. They deserve a father, and I—" He looked away, then back at her with surprising intensity. "I would consider it an honor to be that for them." Beatrice felt tears welling in her eyes. "You don't even know me." "I know enough," he said simply. "I know you're brave and determined. You walked across the plains alone, rather than give up. That tells me all I need to know about your character." His words touched something deep within her. "May I have some time to think about it?" "Of course," Wade replied, rising from the table. "Take all the time you need. I've got chores to tend to, but make yourself at home." After he left, Beatrice sat at the table for a long while, considering his unexpected proposal. Marriage to a virtual stranger wasn't what she had envisioned for herself, but then again, neither was being a pregnant widow abandoned on the plains. Wade seemed like a good man, kind, hardworking, and honorable. Could she build a life with him? The alternative was to continue her journey to Oregon with two infants, facing all the dangers of the trail alone. The prospect was terrifying. Over the next few days, Beatrice observed Wade closely. She watched how he treated Hank with respect, speaking to the older man as an equal rather than an employee. She noted his gentle handling of the animals, the methodical way he approached his work, and the quiet satisfaction he seemed to take in caring for his land. In the evenings, he would sometimes read by lantern-light history books mostly, but also some poetry that surprised her. He never pressed her about his proposal, giving her the space to make her decision without pressure. On the fourth day, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Beatrice made up her mind. "Yes," she said simply. Wade turned to her, his expression questioning. "Yes, I will marry you," she clarified, "if the offer still stands." A slow smile spread across his face, crinkling the corners of his eyes. "It stands. But I have conditions," Beatrice continued, having thought this through carefully. "First, this is a marriage in name only, at least to start. I'm not ready for more than that." Wade nodded solemnly. "Of course. I wouldn't expect otherwise. Second, I want to contribute. I'm a good cook and I can sew. I was a schoolteacher before I married Thomas. I'm not looking for charity. This would be a partnership," he agreed. "Your contributions would be valued. And third," she said, her hand moving to her belly, "these children will know about their father. I won't pretend Thomas never existed." Wade's expression softened. "I would never ask you to. Your husband deserves to be remembered by his children." Relief washed over Beatrice. "Then I accept your proposal, Wade Montgomery. I'll ride into town tomorrow, speak to the preacher," he said. "Unless you want to wait?" Beatrice shook her head. "There's no sense in waiting. The babies will be here in less than 2 months. It would be better if we were married before then." And so, 3 days later, Beatrice found herself standing before the preacher in the small church in Silver Creek, the nearest town to Wade's ranch. She wore her blue dress, carefully washed and mended, with wildflowers Wade had picked that morning clutched in her trembling hands. Hank stood as witness, along with the preacher's wife. The ceremony was brief and simple, with traditional vows that sounded strange coming from her lips so soon after Thomas's death. Yet as she looked up at Wade's solemn face as he promised to protect and provide for her, she felt a flutter of something that might, someday, grow into affection. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the preacher declared. "You may kiss your bride." Wade hesitated, clearly remembering her condition about this being a marriage in name only. But Beatrice surprised herself by offering her cheek, which he kissed gently, his beard tickling her skin. They rode back to the ranch, her home now, in the wagon Wade had borrowed for the occasion, with Hank following on horseback. The older man had gifted them a hand-carved cradle he'd been working on secretly since Beatrice's arrival, large enough for 2 babies. "I'll have supper ready for you when you get back," Hank said as they reached the ranch, tactfully giving the newlyweds some privacy on their wedding night. Once alone, an awkward silence fell between them. Wade cleared his throat. I cleared out the spare room for myself. You keep the main bedroom." Beatrice nodded, grateful for his consideration. "Thank you. Are you hungry? I could fix something." "Actually, I think I'd like to rest a bit." "It's been an eventful day." Wade nodded, clearly relieved to have a direction. "Of course. I'll check on the livestock." As the days turned into weeks, they settled into a comfortable routine. Wade worked the ranch with Hank, while Beatrice took over the cooking and household tasks. She found satisfaction in bringing order to the home, planting a small garden, and adding feminine touches that made the cabin feel more like a proper home. The awkwardness between them gradually eased as they got to know each other better. Wade, she discovered, had come west after the war, seeking a fresh start away from the ravaged South. He'd worked as a ranch hand for years before saving enough to buy this small spread. He was educated. His father had been a schoolteacher in Virginia, but preferred the honest work of ranching to any profession that would keep him indoors. He never spoke of previous romances, and Beatrice didn't ask, though she sometimes wondered why a man like Wade had remained unmarried into his late 20s. He was kind, hardworking, and handsome in his way. Surely there had been opportunities. As her pregnancy advanced, Wade became increasingly attentive, insisting she rest frequently and taking on more of the household chores when she tired easily. He built a second cradle so each twin would have their own bed and expanded the vegetable garden so she wouldn't have to walk as far. One evening, as Beatrice sat on the porch mending one of Wade's shirts, he joined her with 2 cups of tea. "How are you feeling?" he asked, his gaze dropping to her belly, which seemed to grow larger by the day. "Like I'm carrying a herd of cattle instead of 2 babies," she admitted with a small smile. "They're active today." Wade hesitated, then asked, "May I?" He gestured toward her stomach. It was the first time he'd asked to touch her in any way since their wedding. Beatrice nodded, setting aside her sewing. Gently, almost reverently, Wade placed his large, calloused hand on her belly. Almost immediately, one of the twins kicked against his palm, and his eyes widened in wonder. "That's amazing," he whispered. "Here," Beatrice said, moving his hand slightly. "This one's the more active of the 2. I think it might be a boy." They sat like that for several minutes, Wade's hand warm against her through the fabric of her dress, his expression one of awe as the babies moved beneath his touch. Something shifted between them in that moment, a connection forming that went beyond their practical arrangement. Later that night, lying in bed, Beatrice found herself thinking about Wade in a way she hadn't before. She'd been so focused on survival, on protecting her unborn children, that she hadn't considered the possibility of finding happiness again, of perhaps even finding love. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. Was it a betrayal of Thomas to feel this way? Or would he want her to find joy again, to give their children a loving home with 2 parents who cared for each other? These questions still occupied her mind when labor began 2 weeks later, earlier than expected. It started as a dull ache in her back that gradually intensified until there was no mistaking what was happening. "Wade," she called, making her way carefully to the door of their cabin. He was in the yard, splitting wood for the winter that was fast approaching. He looked up at the sound of her voice, immediately dropping the axe when he saw her expression. "Is it time?" Beatrice nodded, gripping the doorframe as another contraction tightened across her abdomen. "I think so. But it's too early." Wade was at her side in an instant, helping her back inside. "I'll send Hank for the doctor," he said, his voice calm despite the worry in his eyes. The next 12 hours were a blur of pain and fear for Beatrice. The doctor arrived from town, his face grave when he realized she was carrying twins and they were coming early. "The first one's breech," he announced after examining her. "We'll have to turn it." Beatrice cried out as he manipulated her belly, trying to reposition the baby. Wade, who had been pacing outside the bedroom, burst in at the sound of her distress. "What's happening?" he demanded. "Mr. Montgomery, you should wait outside," the doctor began, but Beatrice reached for Wade's hand. "No," she gasped. "I want him here." The doctor looked dubious, but didn't argue as Wade took his place beside Beatrice, letting her crush his hand as another contraction seized her. "You can do this," Wade murmured, wiping her forehead with a cool cloth. "You're the strongest woman I've ever known." His words gave her courage, and when the doctor instructed her to push, she found strength she didn't know she possessed. After what seemed like an eternity of effort, a tiny cry filled the room. "A girl," the doctor announced, quickly handing the infant to his wife, who had come to assist. "But we're not done yet." The second baby came faster, but was alarmingly silent when delivered. "A boy," the doctor said, working frantically over the tiny form. "He's not breathing properly." Beatrice tried to sit up, panic flooding her. "My baby." "Shoo," Wade soothed, though she could see the fear in his eyes too. "The doctor knows what he's doing." Long, agonizing moments passed before a weak cry finally sounded. Relief made Beatrice collapse back against the pillows, tears streaming down her face. "They're both very small," the doctor cautioned as his wife brought the swaddled infants to Beatrice. "The next few days will be critical." Beatrice gazed down at her children, her daughter with a shock of dark hair like Thomas, and her son with a lighter dusting that hinted he might take after her. They were tiny, their faces still red and wrinkled, but to her, they were perfect. "Have you thought of names?" the doctor's wife asked gently. Beatrice looked up at Wade, who was staring at the twins with an expression of wonder and something else of fierceness, a protectiveness that made her heart swell. "Thomas for the boy," she said softly. "After his father." Wade nodded his approval. "And the girl?" Beatrice hesitated only briefly. "Hope. Because that's what she gave me when I had none left." "Thomas and Hope Montgomery," Wade said, trying the names out. "They're perfect." The doctor insisted on staying the night to monitor the babies, and Hank rode to town the next day to telegraph the nearest city for a wet nurse, as Beatrice wasn't producing enough milk for both infants. The woman arrived 3 days later, a kindly widow named Martha, who agreed to stay until the twins were stronger. Those first weeks were the hardest. The babies were frail, especially little Thomas, who struggled to feed and often cried through the night. Wade moved his bed back into the main bedroom so he could help with the nighttime feedings, taking turns with Beatrice to walk the floor with a crying infant. One night, as she watched Wade pacing with Thomas nestled against his chest, singing softly in a surprisingly pleasant baritone, Beatrice realized that he had already become a father to these children in every way that mattered. The tenderness with which he cared for them, the hours of sleep he sacrificed, the worry that lined his face when Thomas ran a slight fever, all of it spoke of a love as real as any biological father could feel. And somewhere along the way, without her noticing exactly when, her feelings for Wade had transformed as well. It wasn't the same as what she'd felt for Thomas, that first love, born of youth and optimism. This was different, deeper in some ways, built on shared struggles and mutual respect rather than romantic ideals. As the twins grew stronger and the immediate danger passed, life at the ranch settled into a new rhythm centered around the babies. Wade built an addition to the cabin, a proper nursery adjoining their bedroom, and expanded the garden further to grow more vegetables for when the twins would start on solid foods. Winter arrived with a vengeance that year, with snowdrifts piling against the sides of the cabin and temperatures dropping so low that ice formed on the inside of the windows. But inside, the Montgomery home was warm and snug. Wade had stockpiled firewood, and the pantry was full of preserved fruits and vegetables from Beatrice's garden, along with smoked meat from the fall slaughter. On Christmas Eve, with the twins finally asleep after a day of fussing, Beatrice and Wade sat before the fire, enjoying a rare moment of peace. Martha had returned to town for the holiday, leaving them truly alone as a family for the first time since the births. "I have something for you," Wade said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. "But we agreed no gifts," Beatrice protested. With money tight and the babies requiring so much, they had decided to forego Christmas presents for each other. "It's not much," he assured her. "Just something I wanted you to have." Curious, Beatrice unwrapped the package to find a delicate silver chain with a small heart-shaped locket. Opening it, she found a tiny portrait of the twins on one side, obviously commissioned during Wade's last trip to town. "Oh, Wade," she breathed, touched beyond words. "There's room on the other side," he said, his voice gruff with emotion. "I thought you might want to put a picture of Thomas, your first husband, there, so you can keep all of them close to your heart." Tears filled Beatrice's eyes at his thoughtfulness. This man, who had every right to feel jealous or threatened by the memory of her first husband, instead honored that connection and wanted to preserve it for her. "Thank you," she whispered. "It's perfect." Without thinking, she leaned forward and kissed him not on the cheek as at their wedding, but properly on the lips. It was brief and chaste, but it was their first real kiss, and when she pulled back, Wade's eyes were wide with surprise. "I'm sorry," she began, embarrassed. "I shouldn't have." "Don't apologize," he interrupted, his voice husky. "Unless you regret it." "I don't," she admitted softly. "I've been wanting to do that for a while now." Wade's expression softened into a smile that made her heart skip. "So have I." He reached out, gently brushing a strand of hair from her face, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "Beatrice, I know this marriage started as a practical arrangement, but my feelings for you are anything but practical." She leaned into his touch. Mine too. This time when they kissed, it was Wade who initiated it, and there was nothing chaste about it. His lips were warm and gentle against hers, his beard tickling her skin in a way that sent pleasant shivers down her spine. When they finally parted, both were breathing a little faster. "I love you," Wade said simply. "I think I started falling for you that first day on the plains, though I didn't recognize it then." "I love you too," Beatrice replied, the words feeling right and true. "You and the life we've built together." That night, for the first time, they truly became husband and wife in every sense. Their lovemaking was tender and unhurried, a discovery of each other that felt both new and somehow familiar, as if their bodies had been waiting for this moment all along. Afterward, lying in Wade's arms, Beatrice felt a contentment she had never expected to find again after Thomas's death. The pain of losing him would always be there, but it no longer overshadowed her present happiness. "What are you thinking?" Wade asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "That I'm grateful," she replied honestly. "For you, for the twins, for this second chance at happiness. When you found me on the plains, I thought I was at the end of my story. I never imagined it was just the beginning." As winter gave way to spring, the twins flourished, growing stronger and more active with each passing day. Hope was the first to smile, her little face lighting up whenever Wade entered the room. Thomas was slower to reach milestones but made up for it with a sweet temperament that endeared him to everyone. The ranch prospered too, with Wade's careful management and Beatrice's contributions. She started a small chicken coop that soon provided eggs for both their table and to sell in town. With the money from the eggs, she purchased fabric to sew clothes for the growing twins and to make curtains for the windows of their expanding home. By the twins' first birthday, celebrated with a small gathering that included Hank, Martha, and a few neighbors, it was hard to remember a time when they hadn't been a family. Wade doted on the children as if they were his own flesh and blood, teaching Hope to clap her hands and helping Thomas take his first tentative steps. That night, after the guests had gone and the twins were asleep, Wade took Beatrice's hand and led her to the porch swing he built the previous summer. "I've been thinking," he began, his arm around her shoulders as they swayed gently in the cool evening air. "Always a dangerous pastime," she teased, snuggling closer to his warmth. He chuckled. "Perhaps. But hear me out." He took a deep breath. "I'd like to legally adopt the twins. Make them Montgomerys in name as well as in heart." Beatrice looked up at him, touched by the request. "You want to be their legal father?" "I already am their father in every way that matters," he said. "But yes, I want to make it official. With your blessing, of course." "You have it," she said without hesitation. "Thomas would be glad to know his children have such a wonderful father." Wade kissed her then, a kiss full of promise for their future together. When they parted, he had an odd expression on his face, a mixture of nervousness and excitement. "There's something else," he said. "I wasn't sure when to tell you, but Hank's nephew is selling his land, the property adjacent to ours, with the stream running through it." "The Wilkins place?" Beatrice asked, familiar with the neighboring ranch. Wade nodded. "I've been saving, and with this year's cattle sales, I think we can afford it. It would double our grazing land and give us access to that year-round water source." "That's wonderful news," Beatrice said, genuinely pleased. They had discussed expanding the ranch before, but she hadn't realized Wade was already in a position to make it happen. "There's more," he continued. "The Wilkins house is larger than ours. For bedrooms, a proper kitchen. It needs work, but it's solid. I thought. Well, with the twins getting bigger and maybe more children someday." He trailed off, looking at her uncertainly. Beatrice felt her heart swell with love for this man who was always thinking of their family's future. "More children?" "If you want them," he said quickly. "I don't want to presume." She silenced him with a kiss. "I would love to have more children with you, Wade Montgomery." The relief and joy on his face made her laugh. "Really?" "Really," she confirmed. "Though perhaps we should wait until the twins are a bit older. They're handful enough as it is." Wade pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. Whenever you're ready. We have all the time in the world. As it happened, they didn't have to wait long. Just 2 months later, Beatrice realized she was expecting again. Wade's reaction to the news was everything she could have hoped for, pure joy tempered with concern for her well-being. "Are you sure you're up to this?" he asked, his hand gentle on her still flat stomach. "The twins aren't even walking properly yet. Women have been having babies close together since the beginning of time," she assured him. "And this time, I'm not alone on the plains. I have you." The purchase of the Wilkins property went through that fall, and they spent the winter renovating the larger house while continuing to live in their original cabin. By spring, with Beatrice 5 months pregnant and showing, they were ready to move into their new home. The twins, now approaching 18 months old, were delighted with the extra space to explore. Hope, always the more adventurous of the two, would toddle from room to room, exclaiming over each new discovery. Thomas was more cautious, but equally fascinated, especially with the large windows that looked out over the expanded ranch. "Dada," he called one morning, pointing out at Wade as he rode in from checking the herd. It was the first time he had used the word, and Wade's face when Beatrice told him later nearly brought her to tears. Their second child, a boy they named William, after Wade's father was born on a perfect summer day, with none of the complications that had attended the twins' birth. He emerged into the world with a lusty cry and a full head of sandy hair that matched Wade's exactly. "He looks just like you," Beatrice said as Wade held his son for the first time, his expression one of wonder and pride. "Poor kid," Wade joked, but his eyes were suspiciously bright as he gazed down at the newborn. "He's perfect, Bea. Just perfect." The twins were fascinated by their new brother, though Hope quickly lost interest when she realized he couldn't play, while Thomas would sit quietly beside the cradle, solemnly watching the baby sleep. Life settled into a busy but happy routine. The expanded ranch required more work, but also brought greater prosperity. Wade hired 2 additional hands to help Hank, allowing him to spend more time with his growing family. Beatrice started a small school in one room of their house, teaching not only her own children but also those of their nearest neighbors. 3 years after William's birth, their family expanded again with the arrival of Sarah, a spirited girl who inherited her mother's brown curls and her father's gray-blue eyes. She was followed 2 years later by another boy, James, completing their family of 5 children. Through it all, Wade remained the steadfast center of their home, a devoted father to all the children and a loving husband who never seemed to tire of showing Beatrice how much he adored her. The practical arrangement that had begun on the Nebraska plains had blossomed into a love story that surpassed anything Beatrice could have imagined in her darkest days. On the twins' 10th birthday, as the family gathered around the large table in their dining room, Beatrice looked at the faces of her children Thomas and Hope, growing so tall and strong. William, serious and thoughtful like his father. Sarah, already showing signs of the beauty she would become, and little James, still round-cheeked and mischievous at 3. And at the head of the table sat Wade, his hair now streaked with gray at the temples, but his eyes as kind and loving as the day he'd found her. He caught her gaze and smiled, a private smile that still made her heart skip after all these years. Later that night, after the children were asleep and they had retired to their bedroom, Wade took her in his arms. "Happy?" he asked, as he often did. "More than I ever thought possible," she replied truthfully. "Do you ever think about that day? When you found me on the plains?" "Often," he admitted. "I thank God every day that I decided to check the south pasture that afternoon instead of riding north as I'd planned." Beatrice nestled closer to him. "It was meant to be, I think." "You saving me." Wade shook his head, his expression serious. "You've got it backward, Bea. You saved me. I was just existing before you came into my life. You and the children gave me something to live for." "Then I guess we saved each other," she said softly. "I guess we did." He kissed her then, a kiss as full of promise and tenderness as their first. "And I'd do it all again in a heartbeat." As they drifted off to sleep in each other's arms, Beatrice reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From the desperate young widow starving on the plains to the contented mother and wife she had become, from the lonely rancher offering his horse and his name to the fulfilled father and husband beside her. Life had taken them on an unexpected path, but it had led them exactly where they were meant to be. Together. The years continued to pass, bringing changes both expected and surprising. The twins grew into fine young adults, Thomas following in Wade's footsteps as a rancher, while Hope's intelligence and love of learning led her to become a teacher, like her mother had once been. William showed an unexpected talent for medicine and was sent to study with a doctor in town. Sarah, with her mother's determination and father's charm, became the darling of the growing community, while James, the youngest, revealed a gift for working with horses that surpassed even Wade's considerable skills. Through it all, the bond between Beatrice and Wade only strengthened. The practical arrangement that had begun with a desperate woman and a compassionate cowboy had become one of the great love stories of the county, often retold at gatherings and celebrations. On their 25th wedding anniversary, with their children and grandchildren gathered around them, Wade pulled Beatrice aside to the porch of the home they had built together. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his pocket much as he had on that Christmas Eve so long ago. Inside the small box was a ring far more elaborate than the simple band he had placed on her finger at their hasty wedding, a beautiful sapphire surrounded by tiny diamonds. "I always meant to get you a proper ring," he explained as he slipped it onto her finger alongside her worn gold band. "Better late than never?" Beatrice laughed through her tears. "It's beautiful. But you know I never needed fancy things to be happy with you." "I know," he said, pulling her close. "That's one of the countless reasons I love you." As the sun set over the vast plains that had once nearly claimed her life, Beatrice looked out at the thriving ranch that was their legacy and the family they had created together. She thought of that desperate day so many years ago when a stranger on horseback had offered a starving woman his horse and his name, never knowing that in doing so, he was writing the first page of a love story that would span decades. "What are you thinking about?" Wade asked, his arms warm around her waist. "How sometimes the worst day of your life can lead to the best," she replied, leaning back against his solid strength. "And how love can find you when you least expect it." Wade pressed a kiss to her temple, his beard now fully gray, but his embrace as secure as ever. "I found a treasure on those plains that day, though I didn't know it at the time." "We both did," Beatrice said softly, turning in his arms to face him. "And I wouldn't change a single step of the journey." As their lips met in a kiss that held all the tenderness of their years together, Beatrice knew with absolute certainty that the desperate young widow she had once been would be at peace, knowing how her story had unfolded not in tragedy, as it had seemed destined to, but in a love so true and lasting that it had not only saved her life, but had given it meaning beyond anything she could have imagined when she stood alone on those vast, unforgiving plains.